Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Nick Hockely. Nick is the CEO of the T20 World Cup tournaments that are happening in Australia next year. I'd like to introduce Nick to you. Nick, welcome. Good morning.
Dipen, great to be here. Thank you for
Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolute
really appreciate
pleasure.
that. What we normally do generally is ask our interviews to talk a little bit about themselves, their history, what they're doing today, the role that they're playing, particularly your role as a CEO. And I know
Yes.
you played a vital role in the previous World Cup that was played in Australia. And of course, quite a bit about the T20 World Cup and where it is at the moment.
Sure.
So over to you.
Sure. Well, I mean, firstly, I feel very privileged to be working in sport, in cricket, which is one of my first loves. I grew up in Birmingham, just around the corner from Edgbaston, which is the home ground of Warwickshire County Cricket Club, and I remember very fondly going to the cricket with my dad as a youngster. When I left university, I never really contemplated a career in sport. First up, trained as an accountant with PwC, and then moved into corporate finance, doing mergers and acquisitions.
Wow.
And then London was awarded the 2012 Olympic Games back in 2005, and I have such fond memories of growing up watching the Olympics, whether it was Daley Thompson back in 1984,
Legend.
Through to the incredible images of Barcelona. So kept a very close eye on that, and then one day opened the newspaper and saw the early jobs advertised for the London 2012 Olympic Games. So was fortunate to be employee number 100 for the London 2012 Games, and my role there was to raise funds from the private sector to help build the local sponsorship programme, which was a great privilege, and we raised over £700 million, so about $1.2 billion from 44 partners, which were instrumental in obviously funding the games, but also delivering the games. And from that, really, I mean, major events are such an incredible thing. I liken it to a team sport where you're all shooting for this goal, and also really like a startup. You start with a blank sheet of paper, and then you need to kind of build the strategy, build the team, then build the assets, which in the case of the T20 World Cup is essentially the venues and then the schedule. And then it's really about selling, marketing, and then delivering operationally on the ground. So when the Games was over, it was always part of the plan to move to Australia. My wife's from Sydney, and I spent 2 of the years with PwC. I spent here in Australia in Sydney, and I was very fortunate that Australia was co-hosting with New Zealand the 2015 Cricket World Cup, which was just a fantastic event, probably the biggest event hosted by Australia since the Sydney Games. And my role on that was to essentially look after the revenue, the marketing, the ticketing, the hospitality, and the drive attendance. So we had over 1 million people come to the matches across Australia and New Zealand, of which almost 150,000 were from overseas.
Wow.
And that really kind of, again, just opened my eyes up. So when Australia was awarded the T20 World Cup in 2020, and it's a little bit, it's a bit poetic that it's the 2020 in 2020, and I was asked to start to look at the early strategy for that. Just jumped at it with just a fantastic opportunity, and it's been an amazing journey and a real privilege to be involved.
Fantastic. So we're now on this journey well down the track, and I remember last week we celebrated 100 days to go. With the T20 itself, this time, first time ever, you've got a separate women's tournament and a separate men's tournament. Where are we as far as the Women's World Cup tournament is currently? I'm really interested in just understanding from our perspective, how it's going?
Next year, Australia is hosting the T20 World Cups for the first time, and it'll be the first time anywhere that both the women's and the men's have been held as standalone events in the same country in the same year. And really the objective, the aim is to give both events equal billing. So certainly we're playing the finals of both in the biggest cricket ground in the country, the MCG, certainly in terms of number of cameras, in terms of the number of social media reporters, in terms of the amenities and the look of the dressing of the venues. We don't differentiate. It's essentially we've got 2 World Cups and they'll be delivered to absolutely the same standard.
Perfect. So with regards to that, and particularly with the women's tournament, you've got matches being played across Australia, culminating in a final in Melbourne on the 8th of March, which is International Women's Day. Perfectly chosen date. What are your expectations of that day? What would you like to see happen perfectly, for the day to be, just turning out absolutely perfect for you? What's your dream?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing is just a great cricket match.
Who would you like to see in the final?
Oh, well, we have to be a little bit neutral because we're the organisers.
Yes.
But look, I mean, as a new Australian, I support Australia against everyone apart from England. But look, I think there's huge pressure on the hosts.
Yes.
Australia, they've won.
Absolutely.
They're the defending champions. They're the number 1 in the world. They've won 4 out of the 6 tournaments. But look, I think, as you say, it's a little serendipitous with the date, and I'm a great believer in you've got to make the most of these types of opportunities. So, given the amazing momentum, the date, the venue, the fact it's a World Cup final, we have an opportunity really to set a new benchmark and celebrate how cricket, how Australia, how really sport globally is leading the way in promoting gender equality. So it'd be just fantastic to see a full house. We've got a lot of work to do before then, but if we do fill the stadium, then we have an opportunity really to set a new benchmark for the highest attendance at any female sporting event ever, which is, as I say to my team, very rarely in your careers do you get an opportunity to do something that's really pushing the frontier, and we have this moment. So I can assure you everyone is working really, really hard.
Wonderful.
We're getting phenomenal support from government at every level, from our host cities, from all the tourism boards, be that Tourism Australia or all the state and territory tourism boards, from all of the cricket associations, from the cricketing community clubs, and really it's a great opportunity to come together and celebrate really the world we want to see, because I have 2 little girls who are 7 and 3, and I suppose every parent's wish is that they have every opportunity open to them. So for them, they'll be looking at the women's World Cup final and seeing a full stadium at the biggest cricket ground in the world, and then they'll be looking at the men's, and that sends a very powerful message that they can do whatever the boys can do.
Absolutely.
So from that perspective, that shift in perception, really promoting gender equality. That's the broader opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the momentum that's built, and I've been involved in this with you for a little while now, the momentum that's built is palpable. It's really, really strong. You talked about Tourism Australia, and the federal government have committed a substantial amount of funds to market the tournament across the world, particularly in India. And for me, as somebody who follows the India-Australia relationship very closely, I think that's pertinent, and it's really important to do that. I'd like to move on a little bit further into the Australia-India space and relationship, and particularly in the area of sports and business.
Yes.
the business of sport. We know that recently, in the last few years, India has professionalized many different sports, from basketball to swimming to football to kabaddi, which is an Indian sport, to badminton, swimming, etc., etc. And these sports are really coming along really well in India because of the youth. There's when you look at the population of the youth, 75% of India's population is under the age of 32. 25% of the global population under 25 lives in India. So these youngsters are looking at new ways of connecting to the world with the advent of technology, with television, with movies, etc., etc. They're looking to, expand their horizons in different sports. What do you think that Australia has that it can offer India in the sports, not just cricket? Obviously, cricket is the connector between the two countries. It's the biggest sport. It's a religion in both countries, and it really brings the two countries together. But moving cricket aside for a minute, looking at other sports and what we have here in Australia as to what India needs, what do you think that we can offer?
Well, I think a great deal. I mean, I think both countries can offer each other a great deal. I mean, Australia, and I grew up, I mean, sport has given me so much, not only a career, but, great friends, and then keeping fit and active and healthy. So I think, the first thing about Australia is just a sports-mad country. On the business side, it's also probably the most competitive sports marketing country or market in the world. Not only do you have the mainstream sports of that are popular across the world, like obviously cricket, rugby union, rugby league, soccer. You've got this enormous domestic sport in the AFL. Then you've probably got one of the, looking at the National Basketball League, look at basketball as a participation sport in Australia, and look at the number of NBL players that are going over and making it through to the NBA.
Amazing.
That's another sport to throw into the mix. And then Australia, throughout its history, has over-indexed significantly on a per capita basis in terms of Olympic medals, and really leading the way around the original work through the Australian Institute of Sport about professionalising and high performance around Olympic sport. So I think it's obviously a very mature market, and with that comes just an incredible amount of expertise.
We talked about the number of coaches, Australian elite coaches that are around the world in rugby, in football, and so on, and particularly in cricket. And we look at the IPL teams, and there's many Australian players first and foremost, but also Australian coaches that are, quite well established in the Indian space. That connectivity is very important with regards to the Australian relationship. We call the Indian diaspora living here the living bridge, the connector. And I think that as more Australians go to India, that living bridge can only get stronger and better. And I think that connectivity with sport is essential. And that will in turn build the business relationship that we really wanted to, because at the moment it's quite weak, and we need to get it to a much stronger position.
We're seeing that living bridge in almost every day. So we're seeing it with families, because families are talking about next year being an opportunity for family to come out from India. We're seeing it with universities, particularly in the men's event, which is later in the year, which coincides with when students are graduating. And so we're seeing international students and their families coming out for graduation and then wanting to stay. It's interesting, the dates for the men's event coinciding with Diwali, and how that will impact people's willingness to travel. But what we're encouraging is that people with family here, that their family in India come out and actually celebrate here in India. And then similarly with business as well, is certainly Australian businesses with either customers or investors in India, encouraging them to come out for this moment. Some of the ways in which we're seeing sport being the connector.
Have you seen a lot of support and interest from Indian companies that are based in Australia to support the T20 World Cup?
Certainly to get behind their team.
Yes.
And I think certainly to bring clients to the games. So there's just a great deal of excitement within the community, and I think for us as organisers, it's putting the challenge back to businesses to say, we have this moment. There's a great moment for all of the different expat communities to celebrate their national pride in what is, and really show that Australia is, a real leading model for a contemporary, culturally diverse, harmonious society. So hopefully that will only continue to pick up pace. So I mean we've had amazing support from government at every level. So certainly tourism marketing and encouraging people to come from overseas. But I think certainly we're encouraging and putting the call out to both federal government and also state and territory governments about how they can use this moment in time, which is the T20 World Cup, to foster trade and investment relationships. And that really kind of manifests itself in two ways. There's outbound, obviously, into countries where, certainly the T20 World Cup trophies have been on a couple of trips to other countries, which is great promotion for the event, but it's also, again, it comes back to that common language of sport, that common language of cricket. And then the flip side of that is inbound trade delegations. So certainly we're working with state and territory governments across the country, who around hosting opportunities for inbound trade delegations, which is again just another way in which this moment can foster relationships that otherwise might take longer to build.
Yeah. So anyone wanting to come from India looking for business and trade opportunities can get in touch with the respective state representatives that are based in India as part of the trip to come and watch the T20
Certainly
World Cup.
most have trade and investment offices in countries. I think that would be the best thing to get in touch, and I think the more connectivity, collaboration we can foster around next year, then the better.
Fantastic. What are your expectations as the CEO of the T20 World Cup of the Indian diaspora in Australia? If you were to send them a message, what would you like to say to them?
One, that they're extremely welcome to be part of this incredible festival. Really, two, that we want to make it a fantastic celebration of community, of sport, of cricket. T20, I mean, it is the format that attracts families to come, so we'd love to see people bring their little kids, boys, girls, and really turn out just for a fantastic celebration, both for the women's event and the men's event. And I think the women's event is going to be very, very interesting because certainly, anecdotally, we see that certain communities and certain countries are at different points in their gender equality journey.
Sure.
This is an opportunity really for strong female leaders within communities, but also little girls in the Indian community to be able to say we can do anything that boys can do. So whether it's Harmanpreet Kaur or Mitali Raj, any of these role models that they can aspire to.
Yes.
I think that's going to be a great opportunity, and no, we're the other thing I would say is that increasingly what we're finding is second or third generation, particularly the younger generation, they're actually turning out to support Australia.
Right.
So this notion, what I would say is, you know, for our diaspora, for expat communities, you know, come and get behind a second team.
Yes.
Support your home team, get behind a second team.
Yes.
You know, I think the Indian Games are going to be, aside from maybe India versus Australia, which is the opening match of the women's, you know, they're going to be home games for India. Just the size of the populations, the passion of the populations, you know, that sea of blue. So I think you'd be guaranteed a fantastic trip. You can be guaranteed to catch up with lots of family and friends, and you can see a huge amount of passionate support for your team, and a really, really memorable trip.
And if I may say so personally, that first game should actually be also the very last game. So between India and Australia. I think that's where we'll get the crowd.
Time will tell. I mean, it's going to be wide open, isn't it? So Australia are obviously very strong at the moment, but you know, we can. England won the last 50 over Women's World Cup. India are an emerging force, so it's going to be. And as you know, anything can happen in T20. So it's going to be very interesting to see.
Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. Really appreciate your time.
No, really appreciate your support. Great talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.